Okay, so thank you very much, Steve, for allowing me here today to talk about a subject that has come to dominate my life recently. Although it's not about my business, it has its roots in my business and my networking world. So in January 2024, I was at a networking meeting, and the organizer of the meeting asked us all to give our New Year's resolutions. Well, I didn't have a New Year's resolution, but when it came to my turn, I found myself saying, I'm going to write a book this year and get it published by the end of the year. And the end of the year was December, and that's when I had my book published. So job done, tick. But today I want to tell you briefly, because I've only got a short amount of time, the true story behind the book and then how I got it into print. And my business life is crucial to this story. So 32 years, or for 32 years prior to the pandemic, I was one of the owners, along with my husband, and I was also the academic director of Kingsway English Centre. This was a small training centre for professional people from all over the world whose first language wasn't English, and they needed English in their professional lives. So we had people from Rolls-Royce and Credit Suisse and BMW. We also had politicians, we had academics, we had a whole range of people from the professional world. And during those 32 years, we had literally hundreds of people come to us for training from Russia and from Ukraine. So over the time, we built up a very impressive database of international contacts. Then came 2020, and COVID knocked us for six, particularly as we were dependent on people flying in for our courses. But it gave us pause to think, maybe after 32 years, we want to be doing something different. We weren't ready to retire, but we thought the 24/7 highly demanding Kingsway English Centre business, we were ready for a change from that. So we looked at what we had, and what we had was over 3 decades of excellent customer service. And we had a lovely Georgian building, which we owned on Foregate Street in Worcester. So we decided to, as they say, pivot. And so we changed the name from Kingsway English Centre to Kingsway House Business Centre. We turned our classrooms into serviced offices, meeting rooms, hot desking space. And we turned our student lounge into a business lounge. And from that point in September 2020, I started going big time for networking, because for my entire business life until then, the networking had taken place internationally. We were unknown in the local community. So I joined a load of groups and went out to spread the word. We'd been Kingsway House Business Centre for about 18 months when Putin invaded Ukraine. And I looked on with utter horror, like most people. And as we saw thousands, if not millions, of people trying to leave the country and get to a place of safety. I'm sure you remember there were like pictures out of World War II. And I had this overwhelming feeling, because I knew people in Russia, I knew people in Ukraine, and I just wanted to help in some way. And a few weeks after the invasion, the government launched its scheme, which was called the Homes for Ukraine visa scheme. And this allowed any British person to sponsor a Ukrainian person to come and live with them. And it was actually a very generous scheme, and it was very practical, but it was badly thought out. It had all kinds of teething problems. It was run by Priti Patel, who was more interested in stopping people coming in than helping them come in. And a key problem was that the government didn't make it clear on its website that you had to find your own Ukrainian. Okay, so people were signing up saying, yes, I'll give a home to a Ukrainian. And they sat back and waited and waited and waited because the government weren't doing a matching service. So whilst this new visa scheme was being launched, as soon as this visa scheme was launched, I emailed my database of Russians and Ukrainians, but also Russians, because I wanted the Russians to know that I knew they weren't all in support of Putin. And that went out to 5,000 people. And immediately I had about, I don't know, half a dozen Russians unsubscribed from the newsletter. A few that I knew really well then wrote to me and said, you are brainwashed, you are misguided, you don't understand, we all support Putin. You are making a really bad move here. But I also had Russians who were saying to me, thank you for understanding, we don't all support him. And then I was having Ukrainians saying, yes, please, if you can help us get to the UK, yes, please, what can you do? And it was only then that I thought, oh yeah, I need to find somewhere to put these people. So I posted on LinkedIn and Facebook saying, if you would like to give a home to a Ukrainian person or family, I've got a long list of people who would like to take you up on the offer. So at one point, I had this sort of massive list of Brits and a massive list of Ukrainians, and just sort of sorting out who would go well with who in terms of the accommodation they could offer. And in the midst of all this matching, I came across a boy called Yuri. He had left his home city of of Kiev as soon as the Russians invaded. So his father couldn't, martial law meant that his father couldn't leave the country, but he could, and he left Ukraine in search of somewhere safe to stay. And so 16 years old, making his way on his own across Europe. And a friend of mine had seen my offer to help on LinkedIn, and he knew someone who knew Yuri's father. And so Yuri's father sort of phoned him and said, you need to go to the UK under this Homes for Ukraine scheme. And the next thing I knew, Yuri was phoning me. He was in Switzerland at the time. And I started the call thinking, I'll explain to him that, he needs to have a sponsor, and I'll try and find him a sponsor, and blah, 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 blah. By the end of my call, I was saying, come and stay with me. And he came and he stayed for 2.5 years. But why he was on his own, what his plan was, how he came to speak to me during his journey, the absolute visa nightmare we had to get him in, and what happened to him once he arrived in my village of Ombersley are all revealed in the book. So the first half of the book is his getting to the UK, and the second half is the 2.5 years he was living with us. So, the writing of the book. I had always wanted to write a book, so this New Year's resolution didn't come out of nowhere. It had always been lodged in my mind, I want to write a book, but I didn't know what to write about. I knew I couldn't do a novel because you need to be sort of creative and imaginative and all that. And I thought, I can't do that, but I can tell an anecdote. I can zhuzh up a story and make it tellable. But I couldn't think of a story to tell. And I had been toying with the idea, I'll tell the story of Kingsway English Centre, because we had 3 decades of funny and interesting stuff going on. And Yuri had been with us for 18 months when I just suddenly thought, this is the story. This is the story right in front of me, because our intertwined stories are full of really compelling elements. War escape, travel, jeopardy, drama, politics, cultural differences, and the kindness of strangers. And I thought it was important for my family history that we had a record of that. And I thought it was important for Yuri that his story was written down and remembered, because you can just so easily forget these things. I'd never written a book before, so I didn't know how to go about it. So I just went with what my gut instinct was. This is what needs to be done. So the first thing I thought, well, I need to collect information. So it's 2023, so it's 18 months after the invasion. So first of all, I needed to get Yuri on side, because I needed him to tell me all the details of his stories, because I'd picked up bits and pieces, but I'd never sort of sat down and said, tell me everything. So I started by saying to him, we're going to go back, with your permission, to just before the war started, and I'm going to ask you all kinds of questions. I'm going to record it, then I'm going to transcribe it, and then I'm going to check what you've told me on a map. So we've got the right names of the places that you went to. So we did that. That's about 4 or 5 hours of conversations there. Then I had Zoom calls with key people in his story. So there was his father. I needed to know what his father thought, sending this 16-year-old boy off into who knows where. And I had a Zoom call with a friend of mine in Paris, where I'd moved Yuri to when the visa just wasn't coming through. Then I went back to 2022's emails and retrieved as many as I could. Unfortunately, I deleted a load, thinking that was a part of my life that was done with. But I managed to get quite a few of the email trails, WhatsApp, social media. And then I went to the BBC accounts of the war, because I wanted to make sure that the background to the story was all factually accurate, whatever was happening in politics and in the field of war. That was all absolute 100%. So by the end of 2023, I'd amassed a load of information which needed to be shaped into something coherent. And I'm sure you can all remember being at school or university and you've got an essay to write and you get all the stuff together and you think, oh, that's the easy bit. And then at some point you've got to sit down and make your argument or your case or tell your story. So by the end of 2023, I was in that situation, procrastinating, thinking, I don't know how to shape this into anything. Then I was at the networking meeting. Then suddenly I was announcing I was going to write the book this year. And once it was out there, I felt obliged. I've told people that I've got to sort of follow through and write something. I then blocked out Thursdays for the whole year in my diary as a sort of discipline to make myself sit down and write. And as soon as I'd blocked off all these Thursdays, I then went on holiday in an act of further procrastination. So it was actually February 2024, so just over a year ago, that I sat down at the computer with this great mass of information to start writing. And fortunately, quite quickly, I found a format and style that really worked. And people who've read the book said they like the format. So chapter 1 is Yuri's life in Kyiv just before the invasion. Chapter 2 is my life in Worcestershire just before the invasion. Chapter 3 is what Yuri does when the war breaks out, and so on. So we flip backwards and forwards for the first half of the book. And then I was also flipping between the big picture of what was going on in the war and the small picture of the effect on one boy's life. And it soon went from, I'm going to write every Thursday, to I want to write every possible moment I could get, because it was sort of really driving me along. The story was there, I just had to help it onto the page. Then I was at another networking meeting, and until this point, I'd maybe had a dose of overconfidence. I thought it had never occurred to me that I might need an editor. Then I met Sian Smith, who's an editor, and we were just chatting. And then I just realized that to have a pair of objective eyes looking at my writing from a professional point of view made a lot of sense. So I started working with Sian. And then last summer, I thought this book's going to need a cover. So again, I turned to my networking contacts and a guy called Harvey Fitzhugh, who is a graphic designer. I told him what I was doing and said, can you come up with a cover for me? And he came up with 2 covers and he emailed them to me. And when I saw them to start with, I hated both of them. I hated them so much I was practically crying, thinking he's got it completely wrong. And one of them I discounted completely, think, no. And then the other one, I showed to family and friends. And in particular, I showed to Yuri. And I said, like, what do you think of this? You know, this is rubbish, isn't it? And everyone was going, wow, yeah, that's the cover you want. So that's the cover I went with. And when I showed the cover to Yuri, his reaction was, wow, that's a Ukrainian train. Wow, that's me. Wow, I've got a jacket like that. And he went to his room, he got his jacket, he put it on, and then he did this pose that you see on the front. And the picture of Yuri doing that pose is in the back of the book. So obviously I went with that cover. I just needed other people to make me look at it differently. Then up until about a year ago, I was really naive about publishing. I didn't even try and find a publisher. I just thought, you know, I'm a nobody. No one's going to want to publish this book. I'm going to have to publish it myself. And I thought that meant I then went to a printers and said, like, print 300 copies of this book, please. I would have to invest in that whole process and then try and sell the 300 books. And it was only about a year ago that I found out about this system called print on demand, and my jaw practically hit the ground. So anyone in this room or anyone anywhere can write a book and put it onto Amazon or some other platforms for absolutely no cost whatsoever. The costs, Amazon starts recouping its costs if or when anyone buys your book. And then they take 70%. And to be honest, I think that's cheaper than the way I was going to do it. So every time anyone buys, that's 70% to them. If you're going to self-publish, you really ought to read a book like this, self-publish your book like a pro, because it takes you through everything you really need to think about, including all the legalities, formatting, technical stuff, etc., etc. So I read that book and I thought, yeah, I could probably get that onto Amazon, but there's really a very good chance I'll make a complete mess of this. So I thought, well, I've written it, but so I want someone who can do all the techie stuff. I'm not a techie person. Fortunately, my husband is. So I asked him to read the book, which he did. And I said, could you do this for me? And he said, yes, and he did it. So on December the 6th, last year, it appeared on Amazon. And of course, I went for all the low-hanging fruit. Family, friends, get your Christmas presents now. Social media, local story, local writer, buy now for Christmas. And very pleasingly, the sales sort of were going up, and it was great. And it's been kind of quite hard since then, because like any business, a book is like any business. If you don't shout about your business, no one's going to know, or few people are going to know. So I found the hardest thing is just I have to keep, I enjoy speaking, but I have to keep finding things to say on social media. I have to keep asking people if they'll let me speak. Thank you, Steve. Because that's a way of getting it out, as well as sending free copies to famous people in the hope they'll get back to you. I don't like blowing my own trumpet, but I've got to. That's why I'm here. So I need to tell you that if you go to Amazon and look at the reviews, 94% of them are 5-star, including one from Dave. Thank you very much, Dave. Although I have to say, although I know Dave, most people on there I barely know or I don't know. And some of the reviews have said things such as highly readable, gripping, a page turner, unputdownable, occasionally laugh out loud funny. I have a few copies with me today, so it's available here. It's available in Morven's Co-op bookshop, the independent bookshop in Bewdley and in Worcester, on Amazon, of course. Or if you'd like to come into Kingsway House and have a coffee with me, you can get a copy then, as Lorna did yesterday. Thank you very much. So that's me. Thank you for listening. Oh, I forgot to say. So I did a brief intro about my book at a different networking meeting the other day. And then Lorna said to me today, the most important thing came in a question asked afterwards. And someone said, "Where's Yuri now?" And I said, "Well, he's at the University of Sussex doing computer science." So that's where he is. So he did, so I've had to chop everything down to make it fit a 10-minute slot. He was given a free place at the Royal Grammar School in Worcester. He did A-levels in his third language, which is English. So he did maths, further maths, computer science, chemistry, and Russian. He did Russian because it was easy for him to get another A-level in the bag. Then he got results sufficient to get to Sussex, which is where he is now. So although technically we're still his home, and I've said we're his home as long as he's living in the UK, we don't see him that often because he's away. And then he has other things to do in the holiday. Thank you for reminding me about that.